Hi everyone, I know it's been a while since I last uploaded a video to this channel. However, this time has not been spent idle. There have been quite a few changes to my layout, some bigger than others. I'll start with the biggest. Back in March 2020, I had been running operations for a little while. I had thought the layout to be complete, but found that it was lacking something. While I had Camp D as a destination for logs and supplies, Camps B and C were only represented by a staging track. Running a train into this and waiting for a timer felt, well, unsatisfying. This was when I had another realization. When looking at Camp A, I realized that while the backdrop here is 70 centimeters or 27.5 inches tall, the scenery only comes up 30 centimeters or 12 inches. I had all this vertical space that wasn't being used. So, I decided to install a second deck. It wouldn't be a full width deck, as that would impair sight and reach to the lower level. Instead, I decided to make it a shelf 40 centimeters or 16 inches wide. Railroads are long and thin anyway, so this would work. After designing a track plan on my computer, I bought all the hardware needed. 1 week later, Australia went into the first of the COVID-19 lockdowns. I will admit, I did anticipate this would happen, and having a project to work on while confined home did provide another motive for this expansion. I'll be doing another video explaining in detail how I went about building the upper deck, but as of now, the scenery on this part of the layout, as well as the rest, is complete. To allow trains to reach the upper deck, my only option was to build a train elevator. I didn't have the space for a helix or anything else. I'll be covering the details of how I built this in my video on the construction of Camp B. The layout of the elevator does mean that trains need to reverse into Camp B, instead of coming in forwards. I've decided to explain this away by putting an elevation diagram of the line up on the fascia. This will show a vertical switchback between Camps A and B, thus implying that the trains have to reverse up this part of the line. I've also made a few changes to my rolling stock fleet, and I think it's now in its final form, although I have thought that before. I have always liked the look of outside framed locomotives, and one thing I regret is that I didn't buy an outside framed Forney back when they were still on the market. However, back in mid-2020, I realised that Bachmann still sold the chassis for the outside framed Forney as a complete package in their spare parts store. So I ordered one of these chassis and built a locomotive on it using the same techniques I outlined in my Building BVLC number 5 video. I've put a link to this video in the description below for those who are interested. With number 3, I wanted to do a 240, as I'd trimmed my original Forney into an 040. I made a 4-wheel tender for this locomotive, using frames that I had from a Backwards Miniatures tender kit. Like all of my other engines, it has sound and DCC. Locomotive number 4 was built on the chassis of my ON30 Porter, which was previously number 7. I didn't really like the look of the original engine, so I rebuilt it into an industrial tank engine. It has a Keep Alive module inside to help with the short wheelbase. It now serves as one of the 2 yard switches at Camp A. I had been wanting an 8-drivered locomotive for a while. My original number 2, while fitting the bill, looked a bit disproportionate with its big boiler and small wheels, and I also thought that the tender looked a little too short. I originally planned to rebuild it into a more proportionate tank engine. However, the power pickup on the donor's chassis was not good, and almost all of its power was being picked up through the tender. As such, I bought an IHC 282 off eBay, and used it as the basis for this 282 side tank engine. It was my first time working with a plastic chassis. This was a bit easier to drill and modify. However, I had to add a lot more weight to the model's body to make up for the lack of metal. I had also been wanting a 2662 locomotive, and one of my earliest conversion attempts was actually converting a Mantua 2662 into an ON30 locomotive. However, that didn't quite work out. After my earlier realisation about the outside frame Forney chassis, I realised that Bachmann also sold the chassis for their HO USRA 2662 in the same manner. So I bought one of those and built this on it. I couldn't use the original trailing truck as it kept hitting the cab steps, so I replaced it with one from my spares box. This has a metal frame, which I filed out to accommodate a larger diameter wheel set. But what about the original number 8? My very first video on this YouTube channel was a demonstration of that locomotive, which had been built on the chassis from a Bachmann HO scale 262. I rebuilt the front end of this locomotive to something that I was happier with, and renumbered it as number 1. The original number 1, a Dunkirk based on an old Athearn chassis, did not run as reliably as I would have liked, but it was my first successful HO to ON30 conversion, so it now sits in a display cabinet. The most recent addition to my fleet is number 15, another diesel. It's a 3D printed body which I saw while browsing the Shapeways marketplace and thought would look good. It uses a Walthers HO Plymouth ML8 as the chassis. The body is designed to just swap out on the donor chassis, however, this looked a bit narrow compared to my other locomotives. As such, I widened the footplate with styrene sheet and adjusted the body to suit. I also relocated the original air tanks to the outside of the running board to conceal the screws I'd used to hold the body in place. Despite the tiny size of this model, I was able to fit sound and a keep alive into it. I have the speaker facing forwards, as the radiator grille at the front of the model is open. I also used 2mm white LEDs for the headlights. With all of these sorted out, I am now happy with my fleet of locomotives. With the upper deck up and running, I had space for some additional freight cars, so I built some more. The first 3 were 15 feet long, done on cast metal frames that I'd found on eBay. I've always liked the look of outside braced boxcars, and so I built 2 of these. The third metal frame was used to make a rail and tie car for my maintenance of way train. I mentioned previously that I built locomotive number 9 from an IHC Mikado. After doing that, I was left with a HO scale tender chassis. I used that to build this tank car. The tank itself is made from PVC pipe, with 3D printed detail parts done via Shapeways. After running operations for a bit longer, I actually got rid of some of my log cars as not all of them were being used. This gave me a bit more space, so I bought some Bachmann ready to run models, a refrigerator car, and a 3-pack of side dump cars. After weathering and lettering them, I placed them into service. There was still a little bit of space left, so I built 2 more box cars, one 20-foot and the other 30-foot. These were done using the same approach as the 15-footers, albeit with plastic HO scale boxcar chassis. After all of this, I don't think I'll be able to fit any more freight cars on my layout. After running a few operating sessions, I've been able to refine my operations a bit. Originally, each locomotive would do their own switching before departing with their train. However, some of the locomotives did not handle the tighter curves of the yard that well. As such, locomotives 4 and 15 take turns to act as a switcher at Camp A. The schedule is divided into 5 days, and these 2 pilots swap out at the end of each day. This is the biggest tweak I've made to operations, with others just being refinements of the rules, schedules, and so on. So that's where the Bradford Valley Lumber Company is at the moment. I hope you enjoyed watching. Until next time, cheers.